What's going on, guys? So today we're going to be actually starting the bike, and to do that we're going to have to diagnose the wiring, make sure the carbs are giving a proper fuel mixture, and go from there, I guess. So let's get over there. Alright guys, so in the last video we couldn't get the bike to turn over, and I figured out why. So basically before we would turn on the ignition, turn it on run, and every time we'd hit the start button it would just make a clicking noise. And the clicking noise was actually this relay here, which is the starter relay. So one of the first things I did off camera was I changed the starter. Because the bike was in a fire, there's a good chance that the starter was completely screwed anyway and that was causing the problem. So this is the old starter. I ended up bench testing it and it spun very slowly, so either way it needed to be changed. These commutator connections, they're not supposed to be flush like they are right now. Like, these should actually be sticking out a little bit. If you compare the two sides here, it looks like this one actually got extremely hot and started melting some of the insulation, while this side is a little more normal. So either way, I tested the starter off of the parts engine and put that on the bike and it's good to go. So the second thing I did was I hooked up jumper cables directly to the starter just to bypass all the wiring to see if the engine would actually turn over, and it did. So that meant the engine was good and the starter was good to go as well. So the problem that was causing it not to turn over was actually very simple and honestly pretty embarrassing. This cable right here on this terminal of the relay, this is actually the power to the starter, and I had that on the negative of the battery. So obviously there's no way that starter was ever going to engage like that. So obviously that was a very simple problem, but usually when you're diagnosing something, it tends to be the most simple problem you can think of that you end up overlooking, because you always think it's the most complicated thing. Alright, so we'll actually crank this engine over for once. There's no fuel or anything in, so I know it's not going to start, but we'll just crank it over so you guys can hear it. So yeah, it officially cranks over. So the engine isn't seized. That is awesome. The power, everything is actually working properly now. So now I got to figure out how to get fuel into the carbs without actually hooking up a gas tank. Now, the reason I don't want to hook up the gas tank to the bike is because it is completely rusted out inside. There's no way I want that fuel running through the system. As old as the bike is, and even though it hasn't started in 10 years, I really don't want that stuff going through the carbs and clogging everything up. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to worry about down the road. Alright guys, so I just put a funnel in the intake tube for the carburetors, and I've filled it up with fuel. So I think we're going to try and start the bike now. So obviously the battery is dying from me trying to start this so much. Alright, so I put a bigger, better battery in, fully charged. So let's try this again. Power, run. Doesn't even try. Chokes. Alright, so I'm going to have to look deeper into the bike because obviously it's just not going to start right now. Alright, so after doing a bit of looking around, basically I pulled the spark plugs and tested for spark, and there is no spark at all. Nothing. So obviously now at this point we have a lot of work to do, and I'm going to have to get right into the wiring to figure out what's going on. So to do this properly, I really just need to get organized. Okay, so this is what I mean by getting organized. I got a little whiteboard. We're going to put that up on the wall. I got an eraser and some markers. So we'll map everything out, list everything that we need to diagnose, and then we'll have actually something laid out that we can check off, like what's been completed and what hasn't. Alright, now that we got the whiteboard up, we're going to start listing everything off. that we need to diagnose and go through and check off the list to make sure it's good. And then we need to figure out what's wrong, why it's not getting spark, and what to do about it. So. Alright guys, so these are the things that we need to check in the ignition system. So this should be everything. We got the spark unit wiring, the ignition coils, spark plug wires, ignition coil wiring, pulse generator, and the pulse generator wiring. That is basically everything in the ignition system. So here's the main spark unit. It's got wires going to the ignition coils and to the pulse generator, and then the wiring from the ignition coils, which would be the spark plug wires, to the spark plugs. So we need to check this entire system other than this stuff over here, because I already checked that and I know it's good. Okay, so I know I didn't show all of this on video, but I did check pretty much all of this stuff and everything was good other than one thing. So the spark unit is good. The spark unit wiring is good. I checked the resistance in all the wiring and looked for short to ground and all that stuff, and everything was good. The ignition coils are good. Spark plug wires are good. The ignition coil wiring, so the wiring to the ignition coils, is good. But the one issue I found was the pulse generator. The wiring from the pulse generator is good, and I'll show you guys what's going on. Alright, so this is the pulse generator. Yeah, I know we just changed this, but apparently there's already something wrong with it. So I might actually have to order some parts already before this bike is even started. Alright, so I got the old pulse generator right here. So from what I understand, obviously I kind of started disconnecting this, but when it's mounted, there's a shaft in here that spins. And from what I understand, it induces basically a current every time it rotates into the wire and sends that to the computer on the bike. And that lets the computer know how fast the engine is spinning to give the right amount of spark. So if this isn't working properly, you could be getting no spark at all, which is the exact issue we're having right here. So I'll show you guys exactly why I think this is what's wrong. So we're just gonna disconnect this wiring quick. So we're gonna take our voltmeter, and we're gonna put it into the ohm setting, which tests resistance. This is an automatic one, so I don't really need to do any settings or anything. It just goes right to the proper thing here. Okay, so there's inside of there's gonna be 2 pulse generators. So we need to measure each one individually. So that's gonna be 4 wires in total. So yeah, we're getting about 523 ohms. In the service manual, the number that they want to say that this is okay is between 450 and 550 ohms. So we got 523 on that pulse generator. We'll go to the other 2 wires. This one is at 620, and it just keeps jumping around between like 609 to up to like 617. So something just isn't right there at all. So clearly this is out of spec regarding the service manual. So unfortunately we're gonna have to take this back off. So basically we're either gonna have to replace this, or I'm gonna have to take some of the good parts out of this one and mix it up with this one to get it working. So there's one pulse generator on the bike that's broken, or that isn't working, whatever. I want to measure the resistance in these to see if these are good, and I can use one of these to replace the one inside of the bike. But this wiring is all melted and everything, so we're gonna just snip all this off and get that ready to test. It's just totally melted. Looks like this wiring is melted together too. Ugh. So it looks like I'm probably not going to be able to use this because this is completely melted. We might actually just have to order a new pulse generator. So what I ended up doing is actually taking the burnt wiring and pulse generators from the actual burnt part, and for some reason that wiring ended up testing out better than the new stuff. So even though half of this wiring is burnt, I just hooked it into the pigtail of the good wiring so I could connect it into this connector. Obviously, when it comes to actually doing the bike properly, we will solder these or either just buy a whole new pulse generator altogether. So this is just to get it running. I know it looks really ghetto and redneck, but for now we're just trying not to spend any money on this. I want to try and get it running based off of what we have in the garage and not have to be like piling money into the bike without it even running yet. So, but I did install it, hooked everything up here, and we do have spark. So as you guys can see, there's now spark.
which is fucking awesome.
So yeah, that took like hours of screwing around. This video has actually been taken over the course of days, and I've just been in the garage every night after work trying to get this wiring all figured out. So at least it's done. At least I didn't have to order any parts and wait for that. So now I'm gonna put that spark plug back in, and then we'll actually put a little bit of fuel in the carbs and we'll try and start it. All right, so I got the spark plug wires hooked up and the spark plug back in the cylinder. So we'll try and start this up.